Hello everyone and welcome to another round of Tuesday Night Legacy, where we showcase Magic's most powerful formats. My name is Eugene and I'll be your commentator for this round 1 from April 26th. This is a pretty cool round 1. We have Sean on the left with a Loam Pox list, trying to kind of force his opponent out of the game with a bunch of discard spells into Turok, Smallpox, Thoughtseize, and followed up with a powerful Planeswalker effect, trying to kill anything with the Sudden Edict, and basically finally closing out the game with the Urza's Saga package, Retrofit Foundry, or a Douthie Voidwalker to get those beats in. On the right, we have Mason playing a High Tide Storm list. This is a mono blue list that's going to use all kinds of cards, like High Tide being the main one, to be able to tap his blue mana for a ton, using cards like Turnabout to untap his mana, and finally finishing off with a High Storm list using the card, I guess it's only in the sideboard here, Brain Freeze to mill out the deck, or even Blue Sun Zenith to make his opponent draw out their entire deck. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So I believe Mason has the play here, starting out with that Island Pass. Like any other Storm deck, they're going to start to cast a lot of their spells all at once. So early game is kind of setting up the hand to make sure that you can go off. All right, we see from the Pox side of things, him to Turok trying to get a random discard of 2 cards. Very strong turn 2, not being able to choose the cards that are discarded. But of course we see Mason with a High Tide into a Brainstorm, actually getting rid of some chaff off the top, and casting a Flusterstorm, mainboard Flusterstorm. Looks like there's 2 of them here. Always good, especially if your storm count is high. Flusterstorm basically says your spell is uncounterable. Get a ton of storm triggers on the stack. Had just enough, only needed 1, basically just a force spike. We see Sean using his 1-of Ghost Quarter to blow up his swamp in order to actually get that forest. Since he has the Urborg in play, all of his lands tap for black, casting the Life from the Loam to get maximum value, getting back both of those cards, making sure he's not going to miss a land drop. Passing it right back. Not a ton of action. That was a strong synergistic action from the Loam Pox side, but not a ton of pressure on Mason. And Mason is fine with that. He wants to take all the time in the world to set up his perfect play here. I think he might even have it right now. He's thinking about it quite a bit. He can easily cast a High Tide here, or maybe even 2, start making his lands tap for 2 or 3 mana at once. Or you can Cunning Wish into, another High Tide or things of that nature. So yeah, here we see the High Tide start. So now all of his islands are tapping for 2. We're going to see another High Tide, so they're tapping for 3 now. Floating up to 4. Has 4 mana, uses that Turnabout that's going to untap all of his lands. Now has access to 9 mana. Starting with a Merchant Scroll. Searching his library. Basically just wants to keep going here. Using 2 of his 9 possible mana, so 7 still floating, 2 cards in hand. Gets a Mission Briefing. This is actually a card he was telling me about, that it can, if the opponent doesn't have any interaction with the graveyard, you can double your storm count basically by Mission Briefing a Brain Freeze in your graveyard. So surveilling and getting to choose a card out of the grave to cast this turn, casting the Turnabout, resetting, already up to 7 storm. We see that Cunning Wish going into the sideboard, getting the Brain Freeze, so this is going to mill equal to the number of storm counters times 3, so 27 cards. And we see Sean start to point it out, or count it out, but there was another Mission Briefing in hand, so basically casting the Brain Freeze twice, and that's going to mill the library. And so we're going to game 2. High Tide up, 1 game. Sean starting out with the Thoughtseize, taking that Force of Will. Pretty stacked hand with a High Tide and 2 Turnabouts. Just a land pass from Mason, no No digging here. I think there's actually not a ton of digging. There's still brainstorms and ponders, of course, but not nearly as dense as the blue-red Delver list. Yeah, we see 4 ponders, 4 brainstorms, and that's pretty much it as far as digging is concerned. Liliana trying to come into play, catching a Force of Will. See a hard cast Liliana instead of the Dark Ritual one. So Mason really thinking about this. Both of his Force of Wills are in the graveyard. He decides to let it go and discards a Turnabout to it. And we're seeing a Surgical Extraction come in from the sideboard. I think both players have the Surgical Extraction here, yes. Firing it off to take care of that Life from the Loam. This card generating a ton of advantage, being able to pull back the cards that you're discarding with your Liliana, so that Liliana the Veil gives you no disadvantage whatsoever. Unfortunately, now they're gone. Surgical Extraction, a very, very strong card against combo. Coming in against Graveyard Matters decks. Oh, we see Surgical Extraction for... I'm not sure. Paying the 1 mana so that he doesn't have to pay 2 life. Mason doesn't have that luxury. Okay, we're grabbing the Turnabouts. This is going to be a pretty tough go of things for Mason. Not being able to create more mana, except for the Time Spiral. If he can get enough High Tide to cast the Time Spiral does untap lands as well. So Mason's not completely out of it, but Turnabout definitely makes it easier to get that storm count super high. Discarding the High Tide to the Liliana tax. All that Mason has in hand is that mission briefing. Drool land, kind of tough. So both players pretty low on lands. We're going to see a Hymn. That's tough. Going to cast the mission briefing anyways. At least you get those surveil triggers. Being able to see... Where's mission briefing? Here it is. See the top 2 cards of your library and set up your next draw, if nothing else. And if you have 2 duds on top, you can just put them both in the graveyard. Recasting the Surgical Extraction with the mission briefing. Taking care of Surgical Extraction. Mason says, leave my graveyard alone. It's also probably the highest priority target. Taking a Dark Ritual or Hymn to Turok doesn't feel great. With this Liliana already on 6, probably going to see an ult next turn. Used to be a back-breaking ultimate. It's still tough, but making 2 piles, especially if you just have lands, you just take the pile that has more lands. So there we see the piles. Keep your 3 Flooded Strands or 2 islands. No problem there. I'll sacrifice my 2 islands. Liliana back to 1, having to spend those 6 triggers. Ooh, a Castle Lochthwain. This will definitely speed up. Oh, we don't have it. Castle Lochthwain, of course, drawing cards with mana, so you can do it after you activate your Liliana to draw more cards, being able to see a lot more stuff each turn. Mason just not catching a break here, having to discard 1 to 2 cards each turn. Really hard to come back as a combo deck, but he sticks it out as there's actually no real pressure on the life total, on Mason's life total here. Sean doing everything to draw extra cards. He cracked his Peat Land to draw an extra card. It's the Horizon Canopy land. See a Nile Spellbomb to draw an extra card. Activating Castle Lochthwain, paying a little bit of life to draw extra cards. Another Smallpox. Having to sacrifice a land to lose a life. We see a Brainstorm in response to the Smallpox. So whatever this card is, at least he gets to put the card that he actually wants on the top of his deck and just discard whatever. All the way down to 1 land. Liliana not going anywhere. And there is a win condition, Dothy Voidwalker. Just coming down. Pretty much the only text that was relevant on that card was that it was a 3-2. Mason had nothing to deal with it, so we went to Game 3. Here in Game 3, we see a Mishra's Factory being activated, getting in for beats. The colorless side of Sean's deck kind of showing up. Got the Urza's Saga and the Mishra's Factory. Urborg turning these on to black lands as well. Mason firing off a Merchant Scroll. Going and getting a High Tide, setting himself up for maybe next turn. Being able to have access to at least 4 blue mana if he does not play another land, which might be enough. That'd get him a turnabout, which would get him into 6 mana. Oh, there's that Urborg. 3 mana for the Liliana of the Veil. Catching the Force of Will. Mason saying, I'm not going to let that one resolve. All right, 4 islands and a High Tide. 6 mana to start. All right, we're going to see 2 mana for another Merchant Scroll. And I think that's a Cunning Wish. Yep, Cunning Wish, grabbing an instant or sorcery from the sideboard, the Wish board. Firing off. I'm a little confused, as it looks like Mason paid for Surgical Extraction with that island, but I don't think so. Maybe he's firing it off. In response, he has the blue mana floating. Decides to get rid of Liliana the Veil. Was a huge pain in the butt last game. Not going to lose to it this game. Very good target, as that Planeswalker was putting a lot of pressure on his deck. We're seeing the Construct come down from the Urza's Saga. Of course, Urza's Saga, a pretty auto-include win condition in a lot of these decks that can allow for it. All you need is those 4 Urza's Saga and a Retrofitter Foundry. If your mana isn't too strained by having the Saga in play and being limited by the limited time mana that it provides, basically 1 turn worth of mana, 2 if you don't want to create the Construct, then it's a perfect extra win condition, another axis for your deck to fight on. And we see the Retrofitter Foundry come down as well, which can start generating servos, which can turn into Thopters and finally into those 4/4s, putting a ton of pressure on the other player. So Mason sees that he is under pressure here, but decides he can wait another turn before firing off anything. See a Forest. Turning on the Mishra's Factory, which is actually going to grow that Construct as it turns into an artifact. So we see the 4/4 coming across, so 6 damage. This is quickly turning into a 2-turn clock for Mason. Passing it back over. The time is now. Here we go. Got the Storm die, and we have Mana die. 2 mana. All islands tap for 3 now. 7 mana. Untaps. Decides to use that extra floating blue mana to cast a Ponder before he goes off. So Ponder, 6 mana. We see the Turnabout, untapping all of the lands. So having access to 12 mana. I think 14 mana, since the 2 mana is still floating. There we go. And we see the Time Spiral. So Time Spiral, a very strong card here, especially with his opponent tapped out and not in access to blue. Mason basically has access to just about anything. Ooh, we're going to see a Surgical Extraction in response. So that's going to get rid of the Turnabouts, which is going to limit Mason a little bit here. But as long as he draws another Time Spiral, or maybe he just goes off, then he is in no problem at all. Getting rid of only one more turnabout in the deck. Yep, only runs the 3. So got access to quite a bit of it. So cards that are exiled don't go back in, but everything else, shuffle it back up, draw an extra 7, draw a new 7. Still have access to just so much mana. When High Tide can play 2 High Tides in the same turn, things get kind of crazy. And with just 4 mana, it's going to create another 12, going up to 20 blue mana that he has access to before anything else. Going to see a Brainstorm. These cantrips, pretty good, especially... Oh, that was interesting. I'm not sure, but I think Mason forgot to put the 2 cards back from that Brainstorm. We're seeing another Ponder. Hasn't even begun to use the mana in his pool yet. I think he might be looking for another High Tide to fire off, because that would create even more mana. Did get that land drop for the turn, so we're seeing 15 mana that can be generated. A Merchant Scroll. Grabbing the Cunning Wish. And Cunning Wish probably turning into, well, he's at 9. 9 right now. 10. Another High Tide. So each of these lands can tap for 4. The Cunning Wish into... I mean, if he Blue Sun Zeniths, he could draw a ton of cards. Yeah. So we're going to see the Blue Sun Zenith. 3 and X. Target player draws X cards. Paying, gosh, so if they each tap for 4, then that's 12 right there. So he pays 3. So he's drawing 9. And Zenith will shuffle back into the deck. Has access to an additional 6. So basically he just wanted to draw a Time Spiral here in order to keep going. Time Spiral exiles itself? Remove Time Spiral from the game, yes. Another Merchant Scroll. That's interesting. So we're at 12 Storm right now. Okay, he's just going for the win. So a Brain Freeze times 13 is 39 cards. That might not be quite enough, but he probably has the mission briefing. So there's the mission briefing. That's going to be way more than 39. Sean did have a surgical extraction for the mission briefing, but in response, the Force of Will, that ends the game. Thank you so much for joining us in this first round. If you like the decks, the deck lists are in the description of this channel. Big thank you to Spellhold Games for allowing us to record in their space. And if you like these videos, think about liking and subscribing to our channel. It really helps us out. Our next video is going to be, I know this, or do I? I do. It's Bant Stoneblade versus Ad Nauseam Tendrils, another Storm list. We'll see you then.